Hi everyone and welcome back to my page. Now today I want to tell you a funny story of what happened to me when I went to the library. So, of course, I've been in Spain for at least 4 months now, and I'm like, okay, I think I'm getting a hang of the language, understanding when people are talking to me. So, I figure I go to the library, I borrow some books, then unfortunately, stuff happened, and I ended up returning one of the books I borrowed back late. So I don't even want to tell you how late the book was. So the library is down the street from my apartment, and I'm like, okay, you know what? It's been too long. Let me hurry up and return this book and try and renew it. That way I would be in good standing with the librarians. So I walk down the street and I'm already preparing in my head what I need to ask her in regards to renewing the book. So I'm get to the front desk and I'm like, ¿Puedo renovar este libro? And the woman takes the book from me and goes off in rapid Spanish. I thought I knew what she was saying, and all I heard was 28. And I'm like, okay. She sounded like she was telling me that in order to renew the book, I need to pay them 28 euros. And I'm like, "Oh, well, can I go and get the money in return? What time do you guys close?" She's like, 9:15. I'm like, okay, it's only 8 o'clock. I can just walk back to my apartment, get the money, pay. And I'm like, oh, I can't believe I have such a huge charge on this, but it's my fault. I actually ended up returning 2 books late, so it made sense. So I got my credit card. I had cash just in case. I go back and I'm like, all right, let me practice this in my head. Let me see if I can just pay with card. That way I'm not without any cash. And I was like, ¿Puedo pagar con tarjeta? And she's looking at me confused. And I'm like, necesito pagar en efectivo? And she's still looking at me like I have two heads. And I'm like, I don't understand. And then she starts telling me that I cannot renew the book because I have a book out. I'm like, no, I don't have any books. And she's like, ¿Estás segura? Like, sí, no tengo libros en mi casa. And so she got another librarian, wrote down the number for the book, and the librarian goes up to the fourth floor. All I had heard her say was something about math, and I'm like, in English. I was like, well, the book I returned several weeks ago was in English. Maybe it just didn't get turned in correctly. So I'm sitting there with the lady while the other one is going upstairs to check for the book that I returned. And I'm practicing in my head once again. And I'm like, okay, let me think about what I want to ask her. I'm like, yo tengo algunas preguntas. And she's looking at me like, okay, what questions do you have? I said, um, ¿cuántas veces puedo renovar un libro? Like, how many times can I renew a book? She's like, oh, you can renew the book as many times as you want, as long as you return them. And if somebody else has requested the book, then of course they need the book. So you can't renew it then. I was like, okay, that makes sense. And I was like, what's the word for fee? Because $28 seemed very high in regards to paying, late fees. And I look it up and I see tarifa. I was like, okay. So I'm like, this is not going to go too well, but let's try it. I was like, uh, ¿cuántos es de tarifa por cada día que no regreso un libro? And she's looking at me crazy again. And I'm like, am I using the wrong word for fee? And I'm looking and I'm like, I don't see any other word I can use for fee. And she's like, no, 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 no. There is no punishment for you, financial punishment for you returning a book late. I mean, returning a book late. The only punishment that there is if you don't return the book at all. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, that just saved me 28 euros. I'm guessing what she was telling me is that the book I borrowed was 28 days late. And I'm like, well, at least nobody else was looking for it. So when the other librarian comes down, I hear them exchange some words where she's like, I didn't see the book that she allegedly returned. And I'm like, that is so weird. I literally returned the book several weeks ago. And she says to me, you need to check your house, check everywhere because the book's not here. And I'm like, I really am sure I returned this book. Like, I remember the day very clearly. So I was like, what's the name of the book that I haven't returned? I'm thinking it was President Barack Obama's book, Dreams of My Father, because that's the one I returned several weeks ago. And she looks up on the computer what book it is, and she's like, The Mathematics of Money. And I'm like, wait a second, I just returned that book like less than 10 minutes ago. That's the book I wanted to renew because it is over 500 pages. I haven't finished it yet. And I'm struggling with my words, and I'm like, "Ah, acabo de regresar el libro." And she's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, el libro. I gave it to you. And I couldn't think of the word in Spanish. And she's like, the book? I was like, see. And so she looks, and it turns out that she had put the book on a shelf, but hadn't checked it in yet. And I'm like, okay, so can I have my book now? And she's like, no. Turns out because I turned the book in so late, there is a punishment of I can't renew or check out any books for a certain time afterward. And so I cannot return any books for eight or I should say I cannot check out or renew any books for 10 days thanks to me turning in one book, well, technically two, super late. But now that shows, even though I thought I was understanding a lot of Spanish, I still have some ways to go. Continue following me to hear funny stories and listening to some of my adventures. I look forward to talking to you guys next time. Bye.